This project was an evidence map on sugars and health outcomes, and we included sucrose, glucose, high fructose corn syrup, total and added sugars, and its relationship with all clinical diagnoses and intermediate endpoints. And the purpose of the evidence map was to really see broadly what literature has been done on this relationship in nutrition research and where the gaps are to direct future research. And the whole point of it is not to collect results, but rather see what's been done so we can move forward and conduct systematic reviews appropriately on topics that have sufficient evidence, and also conduct trials on things that haven't been done. Once we collected the data from all the studies, we added it to a publicly available database called SRDR, so that people could use it in the future to direct future research and identify the gaps and where the literature is on this broad nutrition topic. Of the trials, most of the studies were randomized, and some were parallel at 23%, and then the rest of the randomized were crossover trials. We did do some analysis separating acute and chronic studies, where if they studied the people for less than a day, we considered it acute, and then if it was a day or longer, we considered it chronic. And we further broke down chronic studies by looking at 2-week intervals, and we found that most studies were between 1 and 60 days, generally short trials. Our main findings were really when we looked at baseline health status and what outcomes and sugars are being studied. And we found that most of the literature is looking at cardiometabolic activity, which we defined as anything related to diabetes and cardiovascular disease risk, including things like blood pressure and triglycerides and cholesterol. And because that was such a dense grouping, we further analyzed by specific outcomes within that outcome group, and we found that most studies are looking at glycemic response and cholesterol in all health populations. And we did find a specific trend of a lot of studies on sucrose in individuals with either type 1, type 2 diabetes, or both, because we collapsed it for the purposes of presentation. We learned that it is very difficult to look at a lot of different outcomes and a lot of different exposures, but when we narrowed it down, we found that sucrose and fructose were the most studied sugars and in all populations, and that there's a lot of outcomes that aren't being studied, and it's very concentrated to cardiometabolic activity. The other thing we learned is that papers are publishing on a lot of different outcomes, so they're not necessarily considering their power calculations or reporting a primary outcome with a lot of these metabolic studies. So the number of outcomes per study ranged from 1 to 35. So it's definitely, we're seeing a lot of, oh, we measured one thing, let's measure everything. And that was a very common trend in the literature. The main finding from this is that evidence mapping is a useful tool to really see what's been done and what gaps exist on a broad topic, and it's a useful tool for nutrition and evidence-based research in the future.